On Tuesday, August 16th at 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern, our friends at CanGrade will be hosting a demonstration of their product to show you how to get great hiring results by using scientifically driven data. Given the times we are all working in the rush to find top talent, you owe it to yourself to learn more about how you can spend more time on strategy and results rather than hiring and rehiring for the same roles. You don't want to miss this. And if you can't make the date, that's not a problem. Just sign up and you are going to receive the link to the recording so you can listen later. There's no cost, no obligation, just 45 minutes of your time to learn more. Go to cangrade.com/talent culture and sign up today. Welcome to the Work Trends podcast from Talent Culture. I'm your host, Megan Mbiro. Every week, I interview interesting people who are reimagining work. And be sure to check out our Work Trends Twitter chat events calendar located at talentculture.com on the podcast page. Welcome, everyone, to the Talent Culture Work Trends podcast, sponsored today by Rocket Reach. I'm your host, Megan Mbiro, and today we are talking about recruiting work-from-home talent, the challenges that organizations have with this, how to overcome them, especially in a fast-growing startup setup. Fast-growing startups need to look for high-quality candidates quickly, but they may need to be able to trust that those candidates will be able to work independently and manage their time well. Otherwise, it can be very disruptive to the startup's workflow, damaging to the culture, and ultimately a big waste of precious time and money. These are all valid concerns and ones that we are going to be addressing on today's show. We have with us an expert guest, Julia Kimmel of Rocket Reach. Julia thrives in a fast-paced startup environment and has spent her career rooted in the startup world, owning the people function, driving business operations, and growing teams across the organization from sales to engineering. She is leading the growth of Rocket Reach, going from 15 employees in 2021 to over 100 people in 2022. Hey, welcome, Julia. I'm so excited you're here.
I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
And you're not related to Jimmy Kimmel, right?
I am not related to Jimmy Kimmel, unfortunately. But I get it. I get it all the time.
Well, listen, welcome. We're so excited you're here. Let's dive right in. Tell us, what unique challenges do fast-growing startups face when recruiting top talent?
One of the big things that comes to mind for me, I mean, it's hard for startups to plan far in advance. Things change constantly, and if you asked anyone that is planning to scale a startup and ask them what you could plan for even a year in advance, it's very hard to make those types of decisions. Oftentimes, I think one of the things that startups have a tough time with is there really isn't a great strategy in place for hiring. And a lot of startups hire way too quickly. A lot of times the results, there's tons of results of that, but layoffs become more frequent. I think damage to culture, employee satisfaction, overall morale, stability to the company. It's just like, it can all be pretty devastating. I know for us, for example, when we planned for this year, we knew that there were going to be some important factors for just what the velocity of hiring actually looked like. And we grew last year from 15 to 55 employees. And as we look to 2022, we knew that one of the big things we'd be solving for was marketing and really getting our marketing engine going. And although we had really ambitious goals about how that funnel might look like and how it would develop, we knew that if it didn't mature and bring in leads in business at a certain rate, it would really mean that our sales org wouldn't need to grow at such a huge rate. We wouldn't need as many people handling that inbound and bringing in new business. And ultimately, we had a ton of people in Q1 we needed to hire for the sales team. And so instead of bringing on, for me, it was, do we hire 2 recruiters and add to the recruiting team and actually have people helping bring this in? Or do we want to get creative and think about how we might do this? And instead, we hired a headhunter who's awesome, who helped really fill and add to our pipeline for Q1. And we got enough people in the door to hit the hiring targets for Q1. But then we had to pull back. And ultimately, we were able to pull back really comfortably, and marketing didn't scale as quickly as we anticipated, and we're able to really comfortably pull back. I didn't have to lay off anyone in recruiting. And, there's just these things that you don't think about. Sometimes companies really don't think a lot about what the impact is on the people there if they do hire too fast. And so I think it's just one of the types of growing pains that comes with startups, but it's one that stands out to me a lot that I see kind of happen pretty frequently.
As somebody, and if you're out there in the Work Trends audience, you've known me long enough to be dangerous. I'm looking at you. As a former headhunter myself, I've worn that hat with rapidly scaling high-tech companies early in my career. And one of the things that I found when I was most successful with people like yourself, I felt like I was a member of your team. Like I was outsourced, yes, but I was brought in and really was part of that culture. At least I felt that way. And that's really important, right? That feeling that you get of like, I'm in this to win it with this team. And I know, you're on a roller coaster right now, and we're just so happy you're here and you're doing great things over there. And tell us, how can small startups compete successfully with larger, more established brands, especially right now?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. I mean, right now there's so much happening. I think companies like Rocket Reach are actually at a pretty big advantage just because these companies, FANG and larger tech that have typically been places where people go that they feel really stable, are on hiring freezes or having layoffs. And so I think people are looking elsewhere. And one of the things that really stands out to me that startups really can dig into more and actually market a little bit more is there are obviously exceptions to this, but at large companies, you typically work on a very small piece of a project and your work sometimes goes unnoticed. It's unclear if what you're doing is really making a difference. And there are many people at those companies sometimes that are doing exactly the same role as you. And I think small companies really need to sell how much ownership and impact people get to have on the business. Most humans are fulfilled when they feel they have a purpose, when they're engaged, when they have autonomy. And I think smaller startup environments really, where the work that you do has a material impact on the direction of the business, what you do actually matters. And if you weren't there, the company would be hurting. And I think that the pandemic has changed a lot of people's minds, and people care a lot more about how meaningful the time they spend at work is and if it feels fulfilling. And I think for people that really want to have an impact, smaller companies are really the place that you're going to feel that.
Let's talk about employer brand here. We're geeks, as many of you know, about brand, but employer brand specifically. How are you seeing smaller companies using their employer brand to attract candidates and keep them? And obviously you're doing it now. So either, brands that or what you're experiencing right now.
We actually really weren't doing much employer branding at all until more recently. And we were sitting there and thinking, we have this amazing culture. Everyone really loves being here. We have amazing events. We really get our team together. And why aren't we doing more of this? Like there's people at the company we can empower to not only be marketing for the business themselves, just because they have good things to say about being here. But I think what I see companies do on the employer branding side that typically speaks strongly to me and to a lot of people is really showing that they are human. And it's something that I'm looking at, as we've started to do more employer branding, how can we bring in the fact that we really think about our work environment and people's lives at work and how they grow and how they, how we can give them good challenges to grow. And I think companies that are really putting in the work to bring people together and have thoughtful events and things that bring their teams together and showing that to the world, that whether that is photo, whether that is video. I love employee testimonials. Like I love when you see people from a company personally talking about how much they feel supported
it gives me goosebumps. I love it. And it's so important because we're talking about how people feel. It's not enough to have a message out there. You have to feel it, and we have to feel it.
It's not fake. It's not the marketing team talking about this existing. It's someone that's there and experiencing it. So yeah.
So when you're recruiting new talent, how are you identifying who has the qualities and passion for working in a startup?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think for us, we really look at how curious is somebody. I think people that really like things spelled out for them and need specific directions on how to do something, that's a general statement. But I think if you don't enjoy building from scratch and really solving problems in pretty ambiguous environments where the answer just isn't clear, like a lot of people are uncomfortable in those situations. A lot of people don't feel, they don't feel comfortable when they aren't sure if that's going to be the right way to solve this or if that's going to be the right solution. And I think people that really thrive when the testing of an environment and of a solution, I think people that really enjoy that, they usually have communication skills and collaboration skills that are just necessary to partner with people to find solutions creatively like that. And when you're in interviews, I think we really look for how people have either expressed this or not in past roles and in past projects, how they talk about what they're looking for and what gets them going. And I think it's a really, that curiosity and creative problem solving is just kind of a key part of the environment.
That you just said that. Seriously. Curiosity. We don't talk about it enough. I'll leave it there.
Yeah. It's a key part of the equation.
Absolutely. So what have you found to be successful tactics for finding new talent at Rocket Reach? Because I tell you, there's a lot of people out there listening that want some help around this.
Yeah. I mean, I think that ultimately the hard parts about this, and I think everyone kind of wants a secret sauce to how this is done. You can get creative. You can lean on things like, I think referrals are an interesting thing because some companies, if you're just leaning on referrals, a lot of tech companies, they don't have diversity and they don't have the things that, when you start to lean on referrals, everyone looks the same and you basically bring in people that are just replicas. And I think we've been in a unique situation because we actually have a pretty diverse team. And so referrals are amazing for us. And I think if you do, you really, really need to tap into having your people bring people in because you're just going to continue to not only cultivate a diverse environment, but bring people in with different mindsets, different ways of problem solving, different ways of looking at things. And that just makes the company and the product richer. I think the tactics from a recruiting perspective, I think ultimately no one wants to hear it, but it really comes down to sourcing. And I think it's a grind and the least glamorous parts of the job. And so recruiters, it's no one necessarily super enjoys sourcing, but it's where everything sits. It's how you initially get strategic about where you're looking for people and what are the cues that are constantly going off for the recruiting team to go after certain areas of the market or certain industries or, obviously certain companies are an easy one. But I think really fine tuning and getting your team into a place where they feel empowered about sourcing is if they don't, you will not have good pipeline and you really will have poor sourcing and it's the same as sales. It's it is where it all comes from. So I don't think there's a secret answer to that. I really think it comes down to being heads down as a recruiter.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's some of the best sourcers I know, the world-class sourcers out there. That's all they do. And shout outs to you if you're sourcing. It's art and science. It's both because you do need that curiosity to research, but you also need to be structured and you have to love the details of it all. It's really, it can be quite fun, actually.
Totally. And there's every sourcer out there knows the second that you are on a roll and you're digging up and finding backgrounds that are just absolutely perfect. I mean, they're the small wins, but it feels good.
Yeah, definitely. Well, let's talk a little bit about hiring remote workers right now. I mean, I think it's a challenge for most companies. Is there a singular obstacle that smaller or young brands find especially challenging right now in your experience?
Well, I think one, just to start, and it kind of depends obviously on what type of product you are and where your customers are. But I think for small companies, most companies that are small, every financial detail and every financial impact on the business really does matter. And something that doesn't get talked about a lot is essentially as you introduce people in new states, there are real tax implications for what that looks like. Every time you have physical presence in a new state, you essentially, you're paying taxes on any income or revenue that is coming from that state. And you prior to that weren't really forced to do that. It essentially kicks it in. And so I think something that's not talked about a lot is that sometimes that's really not ideal for a lot of small companies. It's difficult for them to know they're going to be having to pay taxes in 15 different states that they weren't before. And any revenue coming from those is now, they're on the hook for paying annually and they're forever on the hook for paying. It doesn't matter if you end up not having people there in the future. So I think that is something that we even keep in mind. And I think outside of that, one of the major things about hiring remote workers that's challenging is we still have pretty condensed groups of people. So we have people in Seattle, San Francisco, and LA. We have people in Austin. We have people in a couple scattered places in between, but really then Ann Arbor and then the East Coast and concentrated on the East Coast. A lot of people in our New York office. And when you start to get truly into the remote work life, I mean, onboarding and engaging employees that are truly on their own in the middle of nowhere is challenging. It's really challenging to keep them engaged and to have them feel like they're part of the team. And HR teams, it's a full-time job to constantly have your pulse on how engaged, what you're doing to really create glue between your workers that are scattered in the middle of the country. And I think that's becoming a much bigger topic as people have clearly started to hire in the Midwest and all over. But I do think it is really hard, and no one's cracked the code. I sit on so many webinars about remote work and culture, and no one has really cracked the code on how to do this the right way.
Well, it's a lot of work. I think a lot of people just aren't willing to do the work. I hate to say it. And if you want to send me a tweet and yell at me, go for it out there. I'm here for you. But as you said, it's a full-time gig. It's a full-time job, engaging and understanding people.
Totally. And a lot of companies, they have limited resources, and their idea of having an HR team with 2 more people on it than they originally think is appropriate, doesn't feel comfortable. And so I think it's kind of reevaluating, what does culture mean? What does retention mean? And what is the impact on the business overall? And having the courage to invest in it.
So what can startups or smaller companies offer to candidates right now that are not commonly found with larger, more established brands? And what do you think? Is it about exposure, advantages, ownership, agility? You tell me what you're experiencing.
I think it's a little bit of what we talked about before. I do think there's a huge part of that that's about ownership and impact. And it's not for everybody. Some people really want to coast and they don't want to work that much, and they want to maybe not make as much money as they would, but they're comfortable with being in the middle and having limited ownership over things. And bigger companies are right for those types of people. But a lot of people, they really want to have impact, and they want to feel like their work is meaningful and that what they're doing has a lot of purpose. And I think startups are a place where you really get that, and the growth that you experience is huge. And I think for most people, if you're someone out there that is looking and is hungry to really learn a lot and grow, nothing replaces the amount that you learn in a startup versus a larger company. It just doesn't. You have the exposure you have to more decisions that are being made and to higher level concepts about how problems are being approached. And you're part of those conversations, and you have more exposure to them. And I think it really does. You learn by observing or having exposure to those types of environments. And I think otherwise people really, there's tons of learning loss at large companies. You're left out of quite a lot. And I do think people that are looking for that and looking to learn, looking to grow, and want to accelerate their careers much faster, and you're going to do that, and you're going to have the skills. You're going to grasp skills much quicker in those smaller environments.
Final question for you today, because I know we could talk for hours. Do you believe that startups and young companies will gain a hiring advantage over the next decade? And if true, why do you think so?
Looking at it from an HR perspective and what goes into people operations, I think that startups, when you're really large companies, the amount of protocol and policy and things that need to be very clear about what employees can and can't do, and things that just even that bleed into work hours and what's expected in terms of being online, and all these things that I think they take away from autonomy and they take away from flexibility a little bit. And I think it's any environment, not even just work. If you have a larger group of people, you need to have more rules, you need to have more regulation. It's just that way. I think startups will be a popular place for people to go because there is just a ton of flexibility. And if a startup is running the right way, you get to structure your schedule and your day and your work in a way that really makes sense for you. And I think, there's a lot more autonomy. And I think people are looking for a way to grow and learn and be challenged. And they also really want to be in their lives outside of work. I find that there really is an ability to do that and structure that in a customized way when you're at a smaller company.
Julia, thank you so much for stopping by today. I know how super busy you are, doing amazing things there. So thanks again.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here, and it was great to meet you.
Thanks for listening to the Work Trends Podcast, your favorite source for all that's new and exciting in the world of work. If you love what we do here, make sure to share our podcast. And don't forget to tune in to our next episode. Catch up with you next time. Thanks to listening to Work Trends from Talent Culture. Join us every Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern for a live Twitter chat with our podcast guest. To learn more about guests featured on today's show, visit the show notes for this episode at talentculture.com and help us spread the word. Subscribe to Work Trends wherever you listen to podcasts. Leave us a rating, review in iTunes. Share Work Trends with your coworkers, your friends. Look forward to it. See you next time.